Hello, BookTube. In 1788, 11 ships travelled from England for over 8 months across the world with over 1,400 people, and they arrived in this new continent on the 18th of January in Botany Bay, and then on the 26th of January, they arrived in Sydney Cove. And now, the purpose of the First Fleet in Australian history was really to transfer convicts, British convicts, to free up their prison systems, pretty much, because it was overflowing. It was insane, and the reason they were like, "Oh, we got to travel 8 months to find this new continent," is because of America at the time. Because before they decided to travel to Australia, they had all their convicts shipped to America, but because of the Civil War, they were like, we got to find somewhere else to dump these criminals. And so they decided to choose Australia. That's not, there's a bit more purpose to that. It's also attempts by the British to create a stronger presence in the Pacific, and also that's pretty much it, really. And so I thought I would recommend we're moving on in AusLit 101 to the First Fleet, the arrival of the Europeans. And so I have a lot of books to talk about today because there's been a lot written about this, and I can't wait to get started. So where should you start with the books about the First Fleet? We're sticking to non-fiction. There's been a lot of fiction, like historical fiction, written about this, but today we're sticking to non-fiction. And so the first place you should start for me is a classic at this point. It's in print everywhere. The Fatal Shore by Robert Hughes. This is a classic account of the First Fleet. It pulls no punches with the brutality that happened at the time. And as we know from a lot of letters from officers and Arthur Phillip himself, they were very unprepared when they came to this country, and they didn't know really much about what the brutality of the bushland was really like. And so it was kind of fend for yourself, pretty much. But the Fatal Shore pulls no punches with the First Fleet. It is a bit controversial because of the detail it goes to, but it's what makes this book so special, and you'll see it everywhere. It's still in print, and it's a real classic of its time, classic of the First Fleet. Another more accessible books I have is Thomas Keneally. We talked about him before. He done that big 3 volume history of Australia, and I have his book here. I used to have a copy of this, The Commonwealth of Thieves. This is his account of the First Fleet. It's more detailed than the one you're gonna get in the 3 volumes. He added a lot more information and just really fleshed out that period of traveling. It's very beautifully written, very lovely and accessible, like the Fatal Shore. But I don't feel like Keneally's writing can be a bit as dry as Robert Hughes, but Robert Hughes is literally an incredible writer. And so those two I'd recommend. A great one you'd see all the time is 1788 by David Hill. It's great. It'll do the job. It's very lovely. And another one you'll see around. It's slowly becoming a classic in its own right, and that's Dancing with Strangers here. Sure here. And yeah, it's more about the conflict of the white settlers with the indigenous people in Sydney, because of the disease that the British brought, and also grog as well, and just the violence of land. It's intense, but I feel like it still does a really good job. Even though I don't feel like it's as strong as the other books I've mentioned, I still think it deserves a mention because of the legacy that this book has really left in the last, nearly just over 20 years. And so those are the ones I would say to start with. If you want to do something a bit more about the reasons why, and the impact of the First Fleet, I would say The Tyranny of Distance by Geoffrey Blainey here. This is a classic again in its own right. It's not as much focused about the what happened, it's more about the how did Australian culture really start. And he says that the location wise, but away from England, being so far away, really forced Australians to develop their own sense of culture. and it's a very interesting read. Geoffrey can be a bit dry at times, but he's not gonna. It's not gonna be the only time he appears on AusLit 101 because he's written some milestone nonfiction books, and so that's like some of the main First Fleet nonfiction I'm gonna recommend for you. I'm also gonna recommend a lot of first-hand accounts because we have so many of them actually, but no one really talks about it. So I do have a list. Of course, I'm gonna talk about Captain James Cook. Here I do have his biography here by JC here. A very lovely read. It does talk a lot about his travel in the Pacific, which is so interesting. You can also do his letters if you want. But probably the most famous one you're going to see is Sydney's First 4 Years by Watkins Trench. And this is Watkins Trench, sorry. He was a Marine officer on the First Fleet. And this is him talking about the expedition to Botany Bay and also the settlement in Port Jackson. So, like the first 4 years. Very interesting if you want more like the niche details of the First Fleet and just how their settlement really went wrong. But it's very interesting. You'll see these on Project Gutenberg because they're so old. We're in the 1700s. But in terms of other first-hand accounts and all that, I'd also would recommend James MacArthur's diaries and letters. So interesting. William Wentworth, he's another one you'll hear around. Again, Project Gutenberg. I'll write all these down so you can find them later. I'm also going to say David Collins. He was an early judge in the convict years. Very interesting reading. Also, William Bradley, of course. He was a naval officer. And I'm going to also mention James Martin here. He was the only early convict writings we have, and he had a crazy time. A lot of wild stuff happened to him. And again, Project Gutenberg, you'll find these. I love the first-hand accounts because it's really great, and I feel like it opens another door that a lot of the histories don't really show. And I think you get more like subtle stories, and it's just really interesting to add to your reading of like just more general first fleet nonfiction. And so that is a bit of my recommendations. I did recommend a bit here, and I'll have all these listed in the comments. But I feel like because it's such a important part in Australian history, it had to have a lot of recommendations, and I wanted to include a lot of first-hand accounts because no one ever talks about them, but they are wild and actually quite fun. If you find the First Fleet nonfiction I've recommended interesting and you want a bit more, go ahead with that. But yeah, that is what I'd recommend if you want to learn more about the First Fleet in Australia. Again, I didn't mention everything. There's a lot that I've left out. If you have any more recommendations, please drop them in the comments for everyone, and also I want to have a look too. But yeah, thank you so much for watching BookTube, and I will see you next time.